Hi, I'm Randy MacLean, the president of WayPoint Analytics. I have Steve Epner here from the Startup Within. Steve and I have been back and forth distribution information for many years. Steve for a lot more years than I have. And we've been shooting some videos this morning to help our viewers learn new things or maybe validate some old things that they can use to make their businesses better. And a lot of this comes from Steve's book called Simplify Everything. And you can get this on Amazon, or there's a link somewhere you can download it for free. Steve has been gracious enough to make it available at no charge to our viewers so that you can get the entire book. And Steve, one of the things, because I'm in the analytics business, I'm in the numbers business, I'm a numbers guy, that really caught my attention is some stuff that's really what I would think about the use and abuse of metrics and measures. Yeah. That prevent people from actually achieving the goals that they're trying to get to?
Well, there are a couple things I think that are really important. So I teach in the MBA program at St. Louis University. And people come into that program, they've got a finance background, they've got accounting background, and they believe that all the metrics they need come out of the balance sheet in the P&L statement. And I don't think that's right. I mean, if you look at most accounting, that's what happened yesterday.
No.
And there's an old saying that jet airplanes don't have rear view mirrors. Yeah. So if you're looking only at accounting, I mean, that can be used to assess blame, but it's not going to tell you what's going to happen tomorrow.
No, and in fact, the ERP suites and accounting systems that we use commonly today are based on a bookkeeping system that's 500 years old, long before we had any of the things that we live with today. And they were really designed, and their first purpose is to manage your inventory, manage your receivables, and provide sufficient financial information to keep the bank and the IRS happy. And they do that very well, but they don't provide very good information or any information at all about how money is made in a company.
Right, which is why we're always looking for non-financial measures that we now have the ability to capture. And many of the systems that are out there today have that data inside the system if people will only pull it out.
Yeah.
For example, a lot of people in distribution like to manage turns. We all know that if you turn more, you make more. However, what people don't realize is most metrics have an offsetting metric. And if you don't watch both of them, you can get in trouble. If we take the turns, I can get you to 12 turns a year, simply. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the amount of inventory you have, so your service levels are going to go to, I won't say where, but they're not going to be doing very well.
Right.
And so what happens is you have to have turns, service levels, and you've got to know how to balance that so you get the most turns with the highest service levels that your customers are going to demand.
Right. If you're only focused on turns, you can maximize turns, right, but your fill rates are not going to be good, and that means your service and your reputation as a business is going to be bad, and customers will abandon you.
Correct. And I'm sure you can come up with many more examples.
I can, and in fact, I think that the first point that you make is so important that I want to revisit it again. Most everybody's seen a NASCAR race, and you can, and I will tell you, the winner of a NASCAR race is the car that spent the least time in the race. That means they finished it faster, and they have the highest miles per hour in the race. Those are the two metrics you can say, this is what the winner was. All the other cars had numbers that were slightly below this. But you can't manage this number. You can't say, go drive faster. They're already driving at the limits of the car, the limits of the track, the limits of the driver, the limits of the environment the other drivers they're driving in. There's no way to increase the miles per hour when they're going down the straight way or when they're going around a curve. But if they start breaking down the race, part of the time they spend is on the track, part of it is in the pits. When they're in the pits, and therefore, if you spend less time in the pits, you'll spend less time in the race, and your average miles an hour will go up. If you look at the pits, you're doing tire changes, fuel changes, giving a drink to the driver. If you take the tire change and you cut the time of the tire change, then your pit time goes down, and then your race time goes down. And so what you really want to do as a winning team is you want to manage the things that affect the race at the action level where people are actually touching something. And it's the same thing in the business. If you're trying to manage your average profit rate, if you're trying to manage your average margin, if you're trying to manage these big measures, your turns, your inventory turns, your receivables turns, you can't touch those things. and they're not directly manageable.
You know what, and that makes a lot of sense, because I'm thinking of your example right now. I can minimize my time in the pit by not changing the tires and not adding gas as often, but I could end up out on the track with a flat tire or out of gas.
Right. So there's a trade-off.
Right.
So there's another dimension that you have to bring into that, and that brings us back to what you were talking about before. And we see that all the time. The most common measure in distribution is gross margin. And gross margin percentage, everybody's worried about gross margin. And gross margin is basically offset by cost to serve. So you have to generate a certain amount of gross margin to cover your cost to serve, or you have to have a cost to serve that's less than your gross margin, or you're going to be unprofitable. The problem is everybody's so focused on gross margin, and they don't think at all about cost to serve. And it's like a joke my father used to tell about the one-armed fisherman, and he was forever saying that he'd caught one that long. And so, you know, it's, and that's what happens when you're hearing these gross margin stories is, yeah, okay, well, what's your cost to serve? And so.
The answer is, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And the answer is, I don't know. Then you don't recognize that what you're really trying to measure is not the gross margin. What you're trying to really manage is the spread between the gross margin and the cost to serve, because that's your profit.
And that's exactly the same when we talk about any measure that you're looking at. You better know two. And there's some cases where you only need one, but like turns and service, you got to keep them in balance. You may want to think about shipping errors. Love to have zero, but the cost of getting to zero may be so high you can't afford it. You've got to look at a balance. So the secret here is making sure when you look at these non-financial measures, you always have sort of the opposite, the one that's going to be affected by it. So you make sure you keep everything in balance and maximize your profits.
That's exactly right. And that so often comes down to the spread between things, the conversion rates that happen between different components of the business, and making sure that all of these things are not being, where there's trade-offs, you're trading off where you get the maximum benefit rather than just calling one metric the be-all and end-all, because you can destroy the business by getting too focused on a single component.
Perfect.
All right. So I hope this is something that you'll think about. This is actually really well covered in what I consider the textbook for executives. Simplify Everything, Steve's book, covers a lot of the things that you would have in a conversation. If you're sitting down with Steve saying, how can I make my business better? What are the kinds of things that people do that make the business better? What have you seen in 3-4 decades of experience that people are using or the executives and managers are using to make their business better? This basically is an easy read, and it lays a lot of these things out. And I know that I had a number of epiphanies as I went through these things. And Steve, thank you very much, is making the book available at no charge. There's a link somewhere around the video here that you can download the book and see it and read it right away. Or if you're like me and you like to have a paper copy, you can order it on Amazon. It's called Simplify Everything by Steve Epner. It should be in the library of every executive, and I hope it's something that'll be in your library soon.